Good evening. Hello, everyone. Thank you for anyone logging in and joining us during the live stream. And anyone who catches the replay, thank you so much for tuning in to the Calm and the Chaos, our mid month mental health check-in. I'm Michelle Beatty, project manager and mental health advocate, and the creator of Keep Your Stride.
And I am Valerie Dorsonville. I am a licensed clinical social worker and also part of this wonderful and exciting podcast.
Yeah, we're finding our way, right? So this is good. Every month we're checking in, and this month I wanted to do a little pivot because we've been focusing on burnout, but I want to talk about the myth of ASAP as soon as possible and tie it to reclaiming time and well-being. Because as project managers, we're often the bridge of strategy and execution, but oftentimes what's not discussed, and that's while we're being the bridge and we're managing personalities and we're ensuring that risks are addressed and communication is clear, is the emotional toll that it can take on us from time to time. And maybe not time to time for some, it might be like a constant for some project management professionals. So I just wanted to have this conversation with Valerie. And so we identified two themes for this specific episode, which is leading in all directions, up, down, across, while protecting team well being. And then the second one is managing time without sacrificing your mental health. Val, do you have any thoughts on those themes?
I have lots of thoughts, but I'm going to wait till we start dive into the questions.
Touche. Okay. So we're going to talk about the real mental health impacts of poor communication. We're also going to talk about how to create psychological safety across project teams, and then breaking free of always having to be on the mindset. What does that look like? And then that organically takes us into recovering tips for teams that are on the brink of whatever ellipsis comes after the ellipsis. So, Val, what are common mental health impacts of poor communication? Let's just start with the foundation of this focus: poor communication and misaligned expectations.
Um, the number one thing that people are going to feel is frustration, right? Because it's a natural human response anytime an expectation is not met. And it can be the smallest expectation. Like your normal route to Trader Joe's, and all of a sudden there's a detour. Like you naturally feel a type of way about it, even if all it takes you is two extra turns, right? So if that is something that naturally is going to create a level of frustration for people, imagine how that looks and the level of application it's going to be. We're talking about our careers and things that people have put in, energy and time and really building, right? So number one is going to be frustration. Number two is going to be distrust, because when there is miscommunication and you have inaccurate expectations, when you have an outcome that was not what you expected to get, or maybe the other person thought they gave you what you asked for, and oftentimes people feel like, well, this person isn't someone that I can trust who's going to follow through and take care of things, right? And then one of the other things that can happen ultimately is stress, right? Because now we're feeling like we need to take more things on because we cannot trust the people who are part of our team to handle the areas that you think that handle the areas that are really their responsibility. And so now you end up not just focusing on what's in your lane, but what's in multiple other people's lanes. And that can create a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos.
So, what I'm hearing from a project management standpoint is schedule transparency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Share realistic timelines, how to factor in the capacity, even just identify what is your capacity. And that could be a daily thing, a weekly piece, during a weekly status, however, but figure out how to communicate capacity. What I also hear based on what you're saying to avoid frustration is communicate constraints, being proactive to avoid scope creep or burnout.
Absolutely. I mean, and Because I'm an optimist. I like to think that people are not intentionally trying to avoid or evade sharing that information, right? I think most people show up with the intention to do the best that they can. But to your earlier, one of the things that we continue to keep going back to is that psychological safety, right? And if you don't feel that you can share those constraints openly and share what your bandwidth is openly, then people naturally tend to kind of hide things and keep things a little bit closer to their, closer to their chest, so that there isn't that sense of maybe judgment or maybe backlash that could potentially come from people not being able to receive the information that they're giving. So you may be able to recognize, like, I don't have the bandwidth for this, but I don't feel comfortable sharing it. So ultimately it puts a person in a position to then try to double down, work harder, try to find other ways, trying to squeeze these additional tasks in that ultimately look like, can lead to ultimately burnout and more stress and more frustration. And now people are, ultimately can come to a head where things really do impact not just that person, but ultimately the team and the project that we're working on.
So much was just said. Okay.
Do you want to unpack that?
Yeah. So, what are healthy ways to advocate boundaries without being perceived as uncooperative?
Boundaries are my jam.
I know.
And
Let's go.
and my and I have developed a really particular way of teaching it to people. And so the way that I teach my patients is, the mantra is to be like Chick-fil-A. And so the reason why Chick-fil-A is the thing that really kind of sticks out is because I'll typically ask people, do you know what day Chick-fil-A is closed?
Sunday.
Sunday, right? And usually people who don't even eat at Chick-fil-A know what day that they are closed. And the reason is because they have done three main things that is consistent with their boundary. Number one, their boundary is based off of their values. So you need to align with whatever boundary you are creating, that it aligns with the values that you hold. So if you are a person who has, other responsibilities at different times, right? So let's say you are intent on going to your Pilates class every night at, every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, right? Well, your boundary is, I'm not taking calls after this time, because this is something that I value in my life that is good for me and I need to protect it. And so when you set a boundary, number one, it needs to align with your values. Number two, the next thing when you're setting a boundary is that it needs to be clear and consistent. Chick-fil-A has been closed 437 Sundays. There has not been a Sunday where they're open. And so what that does is it makes it very clear to everyone what the expectation is and what the availability is. So when you start saying, I'm available, call me at any time, and then all of a sudden you're not available, and then what that creates is frustration, because you've set an expectation and now you're no longer to meet it. So the best thing to do is to be clear about your boundary, and then be consistent about it. And then the last part about setting a boundary is the consequence part. And this is the part that a lot of people get really frustrated about. And ultimately is the reason why number two can often be a challenge. It's because they're worried about the consequence that comes with setting the boundary. So you let's say, especially if you're setting a boundary that you're having to backtrack, right? Where you've maybe been available at a particular time, and now you're having to say, it's impacting my life, it's impacting my mental health, and I need to set a boundary that allows me to, be the best version of myself, right? And so now, naturally, when you set that boundary, people are going to feel frustrated, and they're going to have some feelings around that, which is normal, because they had an expectation and now that expectation is not being met. The beauty of what I think, Chick-fil-A does is that when they have decided to not be open on Sundays based off of their values, that is clear and it's consistent, they're comfortable with the consequence. And the consequence is they're not making money on a Sunday. And they're comfortable with that, because all of the other things that they gained from setting that boundary is important to them. So I don't care how bad you want a chicken biscuit on Sunday morning. You can hang out in their parking lot from dawn until dusk. Nobody's coming to open Chick-fil-A for you. And so that is the other, and that is the main part of when you're setting a boundary. You have to be comfortable with some of the discomfort that comes with the consequences of you implementing said boundary. People might feel a type of way. That is normal. And I think, and you have to get a little bit comfortable with some of the discomfort that comes with the transitional period that people have to go through in order to become adapted to this new boundary.
For sure. So,
So
what I'm hearing from a project management perspective is set norms around communication hours,
that's right.
email delays, meeting free zones, things of that nature. Be proactive and be consistent with your messaging and hold yourself accountable. And, the infamous saying, teach people how to treat you. This is a great way to teach people how to treat you. And I might also add, when you're setting these new norms or reiterating these norms for yourself, is to stay calm if you can.
Mhm.
So someone's not feeling like you are, you know, not yourself. There's something triggering this. No, this is just my norm, and this is how I need to communicate to protect my sanity and my mental health on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I frequently encourage my patients to actually put it in their calendar. So like if there is a period of time that they know is, especially like if they're, oftentimes I have a lot of patients who, who do work in tech, who are project managers, and they are like, oftentimes when they first walk into the building, it's like it's go from the moment they start their mornings, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so once, because they're responding to things from later in the evening, especially if you're working on teams on multiple different time zones, right? And so I often encourage them to create a time either mid morning or early afternoon when they're are able to decompress. They need a moment to have a streaming, uninterrupted moment of thought. And I have them add it onto their calendar, put it on your G calendar or Microsoft or whatever it is that you
Yeah.
use, and
Yeah.
block out the time consistently so that it shows up that you are busy during that time. Because if you don't, what will happen is it appears free to everybody else but you. Right? So now this is going to be the time that people are going to be like, oh, that time is available. I can reach out to them. And then when you don't respond or you give them a response that they may not be anticipating, that creates some friction.
For sure. So, Val, how can team members recognize when they're overextending themselves in an effort to please leadership? I just want to take it to another level,
Okay. Um,
specifically centered around leadership.
I find one of the biggest things that people will feel is a lack of fulfillment and a lack of support. So when they find themselves doing, taking additional projects on, taking additional responsibilities on,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, and they're overextending themselves, usually it's because there is something that they're trying to either be recognized for or seen for or gain, whether that's a promotion or some type of praise. And when they're not getting that back, again, they're putting this out, they're putting in this work with the expectation that they will get something back. The moment that doesn't happen, then people start to build a level of resentment. They start to feel, a little disillusioned, disenchanted by the idea of what they've been working for. And so that will naturally lead to people getting very frustrated and begin to kind of veer off in terms of their passions and their commitment into their work. So that it kind of creates a little bit of a almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in which you are doing all of this with the hopes of getting this thing, you're not getting it, so now you're creating the opposite of what you ultimately create the very opposite of how you want to be perceived. Like you're just dialing it in, you're not as committed, you kind of start to slack off, maybe you become less engaged in meetings, and that is usually the part that leadership tends to notice first. Oftentimes as leaders, we often can become very sensitive to when things go wrong and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily when things are going right.
Okay. Excellent.
You said you looking like you have a reflection here. I want to hear it.
What I'm hearing is how a skill that we need to develop as project management professionals is how to translate stress signals into data. So, like, we've had 3 extended timelines due to overlapping deliverables. Here's the impact. Another thing that comes to mind is like reframing wellness as productivity. To your point, the communication, healthier teams meet goals more sustainably. It's all about that, right? Because we want to prevent burnout. We want to prevent brain fog. That's a real thing. Like we want to prevent misconstrued information. You know, I think as project managers, we're always one skill we're always working on is how to communicate clearly, efficiently, effectively. You know, you might say this is a partial update versus an update. This is an end of day update. Like really master what that looks like, that aligns, what that communication looks like, that aligns well with the cadence that you're setting for yourself as far as your boundaries. Mm-hmm. So we are a role model of mental wellness. You know, to your point, like what I heard, what my takeaway from what you just shared was taking breaks, you know, setting boundaries. We have to advocate for that in order for our teams to feel safe to practice that themselves, which is that whole urgency culture, right? That we're combating on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Because there has to be a level there has to be a level of modeling that goes into the way that people interact with each other, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. We, as humans, we learn often by watching other people do things, even from infancy, right? Even as babies. You don't necessarily have to tell a child this is a phone, right? Especially now, right? You hand a child a phone, they pick it up, you see them using their finger, they understand. Like you didn't have to say that's what you need to do. They watch people. That's how we absorb how we interact with our environment and with our surroundings. And so as leaders, when you show up really demonstrating the importance of mental wellness and how you take care of yourself, how you create healthy boundaries between work and family and all the things, that gives people a lot of agency to really be comfortable with doing that themselves, especially if they came from another organization where that was not necessarily the expectation or the culture.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So let's have some more conversation around urgency culture. What are some signs that could be affecting a team's mental health that is an outcome from the origin of urgency culture?
Oh my goodness. Impatience is number one.
Ooh, yes.
Impatience. And it's like, Chicken Little syndrome. Like everything that is happening, it's the sky is falling. And it's like, whoa, slow down. Reel it back in, right? Because that level of urgency really does permeate a team, right? So people who are firing off 7, 6, multiple emails back to back to back before they even have all of the information, so that even their thought process is like, first part of the thought is the first email, second email, the second part of the thought, and the third one is usually backtracking to one of the ones that they realized that they missed and that was incorrect, so now they have to correct it, right? So you'll notice a very kind of almost frenzied and like very frenetic energy when you interact with people, when they're underneath that like ASAP mentality of constantly just burning through it. And so what happens is naturally things get missed. And so there's a lot of frequent backtracking that then slows them down even more, right? Which only amps them up even more because they're like, oh, I keep doing the things and it's wrong, so I got to move faster. And it becomes a a cycle that can be very, very difficult to break, especially in the moment, and emotions are riding high. So it's important that that's one of the things that you'll notice, a lot of communication, but like incomplete communication, right? It'll be a part of something and then they need to come back and fix it. And then you'll notice just the intensity in which communication is being done. So you can read that in the tone of an email. That could be the tone of within the conversation. Pressured speech. One of the things as a therapist I constantly am looking for when people are talking to me is, how are you speaking to me? Because typically when you're talking, it's very, there's everybody has like their own cadence in which the tempo in which they speak. But a person who is very frenzied often will speak like this, because every time we're done and then we have to keep moving on, and then they notice, you see how the tempo and how the quickness in which the words are coming out. That's what I mean when I say pressured speech. And that's something that you can actively pay attention to and recognize when people are speaking that way. And that's usually when I'm like, okay, somebody, they're about to take off and I need them to come to come back down and ground themselves a little bit.
Don't take off the runway.
Yeah, don't take off. I just need to come back down.
Okay, so from a project management perspective, what I'm hearing you say is build a buffer, right?
Mhm.
For example, into sprints or project plans, end of day or weekly statuses. It really comes down to honoring the strength of planning versus looking at it as a thing to do. Like, it actually enables you to potentially have a great day no matter the ebbs and flows of the day, right? You
Mhm.
can still have a good day because you have things planned out. You know, One thing I try to do, don't always get to do it. I like to, especially on those days you have like back to back meetings. It's like, my gosh.
Mhm.
Um, if you can, even for the person that you're scheduling, if they too have a back to back meeting, I try to give like a 5 minute window. 10 minutes I can't always do. But I try to, like, if it's at 3 o'clock, if their availability starts at 3, then I schedule it 3:05 to 3:30 or 3:05 to 4. And you still get stuff done, and people often appreciate the opportunity just to exhale, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe have, just take care of business, whatever that is for you. Like, eat, however, breathe, whatever you need to do. So I just the intentionality, and sometimes it lands really well with some people, and sometimes they're like, I don't need that. So it just depends, but I always like to offer it or acknowledge it, as I realize you need to inhale, exhale before we have another conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I love the idea of creating a little bit of a buffer, because even if that person, let's say, even if maybe they haven't had that busy of a day in terms of meetings back to back, but you know, life is still lifing. And so
Hmm.
while that might not be what they need from a professional side of things, that could be like 5 minutes that they could like send a text off to their family member or check in on somebody or do something that needs to be done for themselves, that isn't necessarily fully rooted in just work, right? And I think allowing people to be people in moments is really important within the fact that we're working on teams, because I think sometimes we get lost in the shuffle of the productivity aspect of it, and we forget that we are actually all in the business of people. You're
We are.
right? Like, we're serving people, we work with people, we are people. So like we need to be a little bit more mindful of those, intermittent fluctuations that we all experience. And so just that little 5 minutes, right? Like, I mean, especially if you've been having meetings back to back, it's like, oh, well, maybe now I can actually go have a bio break because I haven't gotten up from my seat for the past 4 hours. Like, that's a legitimate thing. So I think that's a fantastic solution.
Another thing that I want to share too, which I think is really helpful, that we honor as project managers, is the fact that we are collaborators. I constantly try to remind people or reiterate that we're collaborators, be it up or across, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, we're working together, we're collaborating to ensure a project gets done on time. And we identify risk and all the things that are related to what we do. But one thing I like to remind myself, we're collaborators. And yes, the respect of whomever you're speaking to is always there, right? That intention is always provided. I think it's also important to all it I think just acknowledging we're collaborators together softens anything, frustration, unnecessary tension because you're working up versus across or things of the nature or across teams. And it's like, I want to hear what you have to say. Collaboration reiterates, I want to hear what you have to say. And I want to create this timeline with you. I don't want to tell you. I want us to work together to identify something that is a great solution for what we're doing to accomplish this goal in a systematic way.
And that approach is really going to strengthen one, not just the relationship with the people on your team, but it's also going to continue to build that psychological safety, right? Because you're demonstrating effectively empathy, the ability to understand where people are. And it's that level of awareness of being able to effectively read the room and utilize some of that emotional intelligence to accurately kind of like assess where people are and what their needs are. Then it makes people feel a lot more comfortable and safe in being transparent, right? At the very core of everything that we are talking about, for whether it is the leadership skills, whether they're the hard skills, soft skills, the mental health aspect of it, at the core of it is communication. And it's very hard to communicate when there's not transparency. When things are murky, that is when challenges begin. And so the more that you can focus on creating ways to clarify the communication and ensure that people can be candid, people can be open and direct, and really kind of become and really bring their authentic selves into the room, that's going to literally supercharge communication and really like streamline getting solutions not only established but also completed.
For sure. For sure. So I just want to take a step back and I want to ask just some further clarification on how to break what is a mindset shifts that one can practice in order to break free of the urgency culture without guilt.
I think one of the first things I want that I would say would be to begin to utilize the mantra that you are deserving of rest. That's one. You're deserving of rest. Number two, recognize that rest is a natural stage in productivity. There's nothing that is produced that does not have a season where things calm down. Everything. From plants to trees to animals, whole 9 yards. And so recognizing that rest is a part of the productivity cycle, not the end of the productivity cycle, allows people to really shift their perspective. Because I think there is a little bit of what's the word, like misnomer, misbelief that people feel that if they are resting, then it means that they're doing nothing. And that if they're doing nothing, then that means that equates to failure. I don't know what math was done to kind of get to that outcome, but that's not actively how that works, right? And so it's important to be intentional about scheduling your rest, because if not, your body will do it for you. And when it does, it'll shut you right down. And usually it'll be at the most inopportune time.
Ma'am, have a seat.
Right?
Several seats for several days.
Yeah, that is a legitimate thing. So if you want to learn how to get better in terms of shifting your thought process as it relates to, the concept of reducing that sense of urgency, is really to shift the way that you understand and prioritize rest. Because people don't want urgency just for the sake of urgency. Right? There is something that is driving that need. And until you can get really clear as to what that belief is, whether it
Mhm.
is your self-worth, whether it is, you think that the faster I do this thing, that I'll get to promotion faster, and then that'll equate to happiness or whatever that is. Like, we have to begin to really check in with ourselves and understand, like, what is this belief that I hold, and does it actually serve me in this current state of where I am? Because what I find is when I talk to people, the mentality that they have now is often the mentality that they've had for quite some time, especially early on in their careers, right? So we're talking about, the fresh out the gate, you're full of energy, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so you don't mind picking up extra shifts, working late, and then over time,
Your body lets you know you are
yeah,
not
like,
the spring
oh,
chicken.
it's for absolute certain. And
You are of
people,
a certain age, as some of my friends like to say, we're of a certain age. I'm like, hey, I hear you. And
that's legit. And so we have to shift our priorities. And so if you can be real with yourself about, okay, this is that version may have worked for me at this stage in my life,
Mhm.
but maybe it doesn't work for me at this stage in my life. Maybe now I have different priorities, right? Maybe now I'm caring for a parent. Maybe now I have children. Maybe now I have a pet. Maybe now I have whatever. And so you need to be okay with shifting the way that you approach your life. It can't always remain exactly the same.
Well, no. So what I'm hearing you say is leaves from an, the earlier part of your share is leave space for thinking, for rest, for thinking, not just, and in that time the intention is to make sure you're not just executing tasks. I think that's really hard because sometimes you just can't turn. Let me speak for myself because someone else, I'm not, let me speak for me. I'm always thinking, right? To the point people like to bring it to my attention, like, Michelle, do you turn it off? Like, is there an off button? The execution of tasks. So I have like I intentionally color, I intentionally watch a cooking show, like something to just break that on, like I'm on, let's go. Like, what does that mean? I'm not necessarily that much of a phone person to be on the phone, but I do love comedy, right? So I try to find a mix of something that ushers me to think, reflect, woosah. But it has to be intentional on my behalf. It's not naturally organic.
Yeah. I mean, and what you're talking about is practicing mindfulness, right? I think people get a very, it becomes, oh, it's only if you're meditating and doing yoga, then that's kind of like mindfulness. But ultimately, mindfulness is just about being in the present. And you can do anything to practice mindfulness. You can read, you can color, you can draw, you can, you can just watch birds. You can sit outside and enjoy the sun on your skin. Like, it can be anything that you find that it allows you to disconnect from all of the background noise that's happening in
Hmm.
our heads, to really channel it into one activity, right? For me, it's my plants. And
Yes.
so when I'm outside taking care of my plants and watering them and pruning them, I'm not thinking about anything else other than my plants. And that is such an important practice for a person who may be really struggling with learning how to turn it off, because it does have to be an intentional act, right? We have become a nation of human doings rather than human beings. And so
Right.
trying to shift into that space is going to be pretty uncomfortable for a lot of people. It was absolutely uncomfortable for me. And oftentimes, some days it still is. I'm way better at it now than I was if you had talked to me about it 5 years ago, when I was running like I had 4 cafe con leches in an IV every day. But like, I mean, eventually it's not sustainable,
Right.
right? So that practice of the mindfulness is the approach to really get you to kind of take a step back and actually have a uninterrupted stream of thought. Like, where are you at right now? Is this where you even want to be? Sometimes we get so focused on the execution part, you can finish all the tasks and get to someplace and be like, I don't even want to be here in the first place. Like, this is not even what I wanted to do, which is a whole nother, aspect of the mental health side in which you've worked so hard to get to a place, and then you get there and it doesn't have the luster that you thought it was going to have, because you're running off of an old script rather than your current script, or where you
For
need to.
sure. For sure. So what I hear what one of my takeaways of what from what you're sharing. So what I'm hearing is urgency doesn't always equal importance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So how does how can an individual set let's see. No, this is better. What are mental health risks of always on work environment? I want to really drive that during this episode. What are mental health risks from always being on? Like, we're chipping away at this, right? We're reminding people to be mindful. We're reminding the importance of communication. We're reminding the importance of boundaries. But what are some additional risks of always being on in the work environment? How does that impact the work environment? We've talked about impacting us, right? But what about the work environment?
I mean, one, greater burnout, right? A lot more compassion fatigue is another one, especially for people who are often in the role of collaborators, like project managers are. When you're often kind of like the middle person for everyone, and you're frequently holding so many people's weight and heaviness, regardless of whether that's related to the project or not. Compassion fatigue is huge. And what that tends to do is, from a overall standpoint as it relates to your project, is that things are going to start getting missed because people mentally are not as sharp.
Yeah.
Proactivity is harder, right? Problem solving and creativity absolutely impacted, right?
Mhm.
Because the stress that people often feel experience during the day tends to impact their ability to sleep at night. So when you wake up the next morning, so you had a rough day yesterday and like maybe you slept terrible that night, the next morning you're going to be more reactive, more irritable, and again moving back towards a place where you're way more susceptible to that irritability and burnout, because you're not coming in getting that restorative sleep that you should have gotten the night before.
Mhm.
And so then you make decision making absolutely impacted, right? Because when we're irritable and we haven't gotten enough sleep and we have a lot and we're feeling very overwhelmed by the things that we're experiencing and that stress level, people will either do one of two things. One, they'll go for the path of least resistance. So whatever is the easiest, that's what we're going to do. Or they're just going to avoid making a decision because they can't make one. Right? So like there's now too many thoughts and too many things going on in their mind that they can't even organize their thoughts in such a way that they can systematically make a decision. So sometimes people get stuck, and it's not because they don't want to, but it's hard for them to make a choice.
For sure.
Right? And so from a mental health standpoint, what that can ultimately lead to is depression, that can lead to anxiety. From a medical standpoint, that can lead to high blood pressure, right? People tend to become more stagnant and sedentary because they're so exhausted from the day that they don't move their bodies later on in the evening. So people can become, you know get weight gain, less coordinated, right? More susceptible to injury, more susceptible to illness, right? Because we're not taking care of ourselves the way that we need to, and stress definitely impacts our immune system. So
Mhm.
it all kind of like creates a little bit of a perfect storm of all the things that we don't want to have to deal with from both a physical health and a mental health aspect.
For sure. For sure. So, my takeaways from what you're sharing is normalize non responsiveness outside of work. So,
Absolutely.
basically, digital detox, disconnect, it will be there tomorrow, and breathe while you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no holding breath on that. Like, oh my gosh. And
Yeah.
then my other takeaway from what you're sharing is prioritize deliverables. So basically, what I'm hearing you share or encourage is keep a human lens, right? Um, to to everything, to just an interaction in a Teams chat, an interaction in email, but also one on one. It's like in all forms of communication. Remember that we're dealing with humans, and we also need to determine what's achievable.
Absolutely.
Let's like we determine the ROI, we determine our definition of done, we assess outcomes. Let's also assess what's achievable while we're making all this from a sustainability perspective as well.
Absolutely. One of the things, my child from a very, even when he was a toddler, was always very like everything needs to happen right now. And it wouldn't matter what I was doing, where we were. It was like, mom, 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 mom. Right. And so one of the things I taught him was, are you on fire? And he would look at me, when you're 3 and your mother asks you that question, it's a strange question. He's like, well, no. Okay, so then he can wait. Give me a minute. And that became our way of me teaching him how to slow down. And so when he would need to say something over time, he would say, okay, mom, I want to ask you something. I'm not on fire, but can we talk about it? Da, da, da. And okay, cool. Because now he was able to start regulating himself, the joys of having a mother as a therapist, and really kind of figure out like, okay, this is not an emergency. Because if you don't teach yourself a little bit of that language to be able to begin to identify what is actually an emergency and what
Hmm.
things can comfortably wait until tomorrow, then it's hard for you to determine when to act and when to wait.
For
And that
sure.
is a really important aspect of being able to feel comfortable with reducing that level of urgency and taking your time.
We should ask ourselves, are we on fire when we're, yeah,
Yeah,
girl.
like it's legit.
Yeah. Well, maybe our chair, maybe not ourselves, is our chair on fire. Okay. So, last question for the episode.
Yeah.
What tips do you have for recovery and resilience when teams are already being burnt out?
That's a great question. I
I
mean,
feel like you just threw the towel. Like, what?
no, because I think that that's such a it's a little bit of a complex answer
Mhm.
because each team is so different, and the reasons as to why they got to burnout can be multifaceted. So I think number one, assess first. Like, how did we get here? Right? Was there a lack of communication? Was there not enough people on the team to actually, spread out the work in a way that deliverables were actually sustainable, right? What actually contributed to the burnout? I think that is probably going to be the most important thing because until you can identify what is contributing to the problem, it's going to be very difficult to identify an active solution that's going to be effective, right? We don't just want to just throw darts at a wall and hope it sticks, right? So taking a step back to really assess how did we get here, then what can we do differently moving forward, and then the last part is to be okay with it being done in phases. You don't have to change all the things at one time. In actuality, that's probably a terrible idea because people's brains need time to adapt to change. You start changing too many things and people get out of sorts. So identify what changes you need to make, and then prioritize which ones need to happen now and which ones we can wait on. Because if you start changing things too much, then people get really bent out of shape, and like then they don't want to do anything. And that's just typically a human response, because they get overwhelmed and then they just shut down. So assess first, figure out the contributing factors, come up with a plan, and then and implement that plan in phases.
Listen, I am like the iteration reminder. Like, this is just the first iteration. We can change it again. There's going to be
That's right.
another. Let's celebrate the small wins. And maybe for some, celebrating might be too much because you're thinking, well, we're not here yet. But it's like, okay, roll this back. Are we ahead of schedule? Are we further than what we did? Do we have enough for this meeting today? Or, what, however. Yeah, I love that you said, recognize phases. I think that applies to us personally as project managers during execution, beyond documenting our process, right, of what we're doing. So yeah.
Absolutely.
You have final thoughts?
I never have final thoughts because I'm always just like, because there's just so many. Can never pick just one. I mean, I think most importantly, recognize that Rome isn't built in a day, right? Like, be comfortable with the idea that this is going to take time. If you have been functioning at this particular, cadence and speed and intensity for the past 5, 10, 15 years of your life, it's unless there's like a major life change, you're not going to just go from, Speedy Gonzalez to like a sloth. It's not going to happen. So give yourself time to adjust and adapt to those changes so that it starts to create a newer sense of normal for you, so that you're not ending up creating more resistance to the change in and of itself.
I'm a member of Baddies in Tech, and so in their April Baddie Bulletin, the headline for the email, if February didn't, March, April, May. I thought it was so cute, but so true, right? Like, okay,
Right.
that's clever, that's cute. And it's like, remember, there's always another
Another one.
an, another opportunity. So yeah, I love it. I love it. So my final thoughts, or my thing to share, I want to reiterate the phases,
Mm.
right? What is the definition of done? It can be amazingly long or intentionally short, but recognize the growth, the lessons. Who was there for you? What did you learn about yourself, right? Like all the things. What did you learn about yourself? All the phases. What are the gifts each phase gives you? So you can just recognize your growth and your resilience and all the things. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for catching the replay. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We'll see you in May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so excited about that. Um, all the things. So I wish you nothing but wellness and increasing prosperity, but also just remember to nurture yourself always, because you come first and you're a priority as much as your projects.